Good evening. My name is Brian Leib. I'm the Executive Director of the Iranian Americans for Liberty, and I'm currently sitting in IAL studios right here in Washington, D.C. On behalf of our Board of Directors, our Board of Advisors, and our supporters all throughout the nation, please allow me to welcome all of you to this evening's first virtual Congressional Meet and Greet of 2022. In 2021, we proudly hosted 16 members of Congress, with members such as Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, Congressman Byron Donalds, Congressman Chip Roy, Congresswoman Yvette Herrell, and many more. This evening, we are honored to host Congressman Pat Fallon from the Lone Star State of Texas. So before we jump into the Q&A here, I'll tell the audience a little bit more about our organization, and then we'll switch back here. Okay. So the Iranian Americans for Liberty, we're a bipartisan group of Iranian Americans all throughout the country that believe in supporting and strengthening U.S. foreign policy as it relates to the Islamic Republic of Iran and bringing democracy, human rights accountability, and transparency to what's happening over in Iran. As I mentioned, we hosted 16 members last year. This is our first event of 2022, and we are truly honored to be able to host Congressman Pat Fallon from Texas. So at this time, Congressman, I want to welcome you into the broadcast and give you an opportunity to give some opening remarks before we jump into our Q&A.
No, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.
And just having grown up and been a kid during the Iranian hostage crisis, it really put that nation on the map for Americans. And when you look and learn of the rich history of this, the Persian people,
it's really it's never something that you want to see when people are in bondage, ever. But it bites a little bit deeper and cuts a little bit. It wounds more when you know that the potential for Iran. And they're not living up to it and not even coming close because they're living under, the heel of a boot. Because there is a proverbial gun to the heads of those wonderful folks. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to visiting and touching on with you. And hopefully we'll have a day where when I was a kid, we never thought the Soviet Union would fall. But it did. So I'm hoping that someday the Iranian people will be free.
Well, we hope that day will come as well, and I think it's very important to make a distinction between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. The Iranian regime has been chanting death to America, death to Israel, and funding terrorism all around the world, while the Iranian people are desperate for freedom, for liberty, and they really do cherish and value a lot of American values, and I think the American people should know that. They should certainly know that the Iranian people yearn for that day when freedom will come, and with members of Congress like yourself, maybe that day will come. So we're gonna get started with the first question, and first question being, we've got to talk about this federal spending in this country. That's just beyond out of control. We're most likely going to cross over the 30 trillion threshold in this year. Yes, I said trillion.
I know.
So tell us a little bit more, and tell the audience a little bit more about your position on federal debt, the federal spending that's attributed to where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always been a debt and deficit hawk because it never made any sense to me that the federal government would spend more money than it takes in. You don't see that at any other level of government. It doesn't matter if it's a school board, city, county, state. They all only can spend what their revenues are. I mean, we can't really do it as individuals. You can use your credit card for a little bit, but then your credit will get cut. But only in D.C., because the printing press is down the street, somehow they get to, deficit spend. It's very dangerous. Right now, as you said, it's $29 trillion. It's about to reach another threshold and, dare I say, be $30 trillion. But here's the scary part. Looking forward, it gets a lot worse. In today's dollars, 29 years from now, estimates are that the debt will be at 118 trillion. 118 trillion in today's money. If what Joe Biden calls the Build Back Better, I call it the Biden-Bernie bankruptcy boondoggle, or the Quad B. If the Quad B were to pass, that debt at 118 and 29 years would be 140 trillion. So there's a really good argument to be made that the Quad B would have cost $22 trillion. That's, it's a colossal amount of money. And the deficit this year, right, or I should say for 2021, was just under $3 trillion. That's, I mean, I don't even know. As you can see, at a loss for words. This is insanity. This is unsustainable. I think it's a clear and present danger to our national security. And we saw what happened. I mean, we're not in austerity like Ireland had to go to, and Spain and Greece, because we're the world's reserve currency. If that were to ever be taken away, it's going to be devastating. The lives that we lead now, it would threaten our status really as a first world nation, quite frankly. So I'm very concerned about it, and we have to rein this in, and nobody in D.C. seems to be serious about it. I'm a big proponent of a balanced budget amendment. That big boulder got all the way up the mountain almost 25 years ago, and they one vote away from kicking it to the states. And now that boulder's rolled all the way back down the hill. We got to start pushing it back up, having a serious conversation about it, putting Democrats on the spot as well, particularly in purple districts, to say, do you support a balanced budget amendment or not? And if you don't, why? And hopefully start lifting that back up, because that's the one thing that can really, I think, save the country in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if you look at from a common sense perspective in terms of what's happening, you can see that we're out of control with the spending. We're out of control with all of this, and it's got to catch up at some point. No,
I think it's catching up with us as we're seeing the runaway inflation.
Right. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Inflation's through the roof. That's going to keep growing, and of course, that's happened on President Biden's watch.
Yes, it has.
Well, Congressman, thank you for touching on that. For the next question, we're going to discuss an issue that's on the minds of millions of Americans, and I'm sure millions of constituents throughout the state of Texas. That's the crisis on the southern border. And there most certainly is a crisis happening on our southern border right now. Now, during a recent interview on Fox and Friends, you said that the border crisis was manufactured from Biden's wokeness and weakness. So elaborate a little bit more on that statement, please.
I've been to the border in Texas. What Joe Biden has done is he's made every state a border state. Not just Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, all 50 states. He's catering to the far left, and a secure border is in the best interest of Mexico and the United States. An open border is an immoral border for several reasons. First, this is the only time in our history where we've had at least 160,000 registered border crossings, recorded border crossings, at least in a month for 10 months. We've never had that happen before. 2 million border crossings, or nearly 2 million border crossings in a year, that's never happened before either. Now, why is this happening all of a sudden? Well, if you ask Kamala Harris, she'll tell you it's because of climate change. I would agree with our vice president in this sense. It was the climate that changed at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue come 20 January of last year. We had Wait in Mexico, which was probably the best policy that any administration had ever implemented, where somebody that would come to the United States and claim asylum, okay, we're going to adjudicate your claim, but you're going to wait in Mexico. Because most of these people, as we know, are economic refugees. They're not political refugees. I feel for them. I get the fact that they want to lead a better life, but there's a process to come to this country legally. Borders, language, culture equals nation. So Wait in Mexico became catch and release. Joe Biden catches them on the border. I've seen this too. I have local sheriffs calling me saying, Pat, we got 18 people. We just picked them up. They're all illegal. We got 2 coyotes with them. And I think they're going to run these 3 young ladies in a sexual trafficking ring. But they're so afraid to say anything because they got family back home, and that's the collateral for these cartels. The cartels don't just smuggle drugs. They smuggle people too. And that's the gift that keeps on giving to them. Because once they sell that kilo of heroin or cocaine or fentanyl or methamphetamine, that deal is done. They don't make any money from that brick once it's gone. They do with human trafficking, and that's the frightening thing. Fentanyl seizures, 11,201 pounds of fentanyl were seized just on the border last year. That's enough to kill every American man, woman, and child 7 times over. That's how deadly that stuff is. Almost 200,000 pounds of methamphetamine just at the border. I'm not even talking about inland seizures. So we had Wait in Mexico, became catch and release. We had deport criminals. That became cartels, run amok. We had build the wall, and then it became open the gate. Policies affect things. Nobody ever talks about the 30% of women that migrate, single younger women from Mexico and southern Mexico and Central America that come to this country. 30% of them are raped or sexually assaulted along the journey. Do we want the Mexican drug cartels to control our southern border, or do we want the federal government? Because it's their job. And the cartels have a GDP roughly of $30 billion a year. That's the GDP of a small nation state, Brian. Like Estonia, 32 billion. Latvia is 33 billion. These are NATO allies. These are nation states. The drug cartels are a nation state. People don't know what's going on the southern border, and that's why the American media won't report on it. The Mexican media can't because they'll be murdered by the cartels if they do. And you may not have known that. A lot of people don't. That's what I'm trying to do as a Texas member of Congress, is to bring the truth and to light, because if the American people really knew what was going on, they would demand a secure border. They would demand it. They would insist on it, because if you're not safe, then you're not free. And quite frankly, we're not free right now because of what's going on the southern border.
Well, you and members of the Texas congressional delegation have certainly been beating this drum, and your governor as well. You guys have taken historic action, in my opinion, to protect the border, and I hope that continues. And more power to you guys.
Oh, thank you. We have to.
Exactly. It needs to happen, because they come in through the choke points in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, and they spread all throughout this country.
And 2 points I want to make. Fentanyl is mostly manufactured. I mean, meth is manufactured in giant labs in Mexico now, but fentanyl is mostly coming from China. And so China gets a double whammy, right? Their underworld makes a lot of money, but they also weaken the United States. It's a clear and present danger to our health and our growth and our prosperity as well. And the people that live on the border are tired of it. They've had it. That was a heavily Democratic area for the last several decades.
It's flipped, yeah?
It's flipping. There's a Democratic state rep, okay, 18-year Democratic state rep named Ryan Guillen. I served with him in the Texas House for 6 years. Good guy, good member, conservative Democrat. He would tell me, he'd whisper to me things. Now I can tell you, because the way the story ends. But he would say, Pat, I vote for the Republican president and stuff. I go, Ryan, I figured you did. He was pro-life with us, pro-guns. Anyway, long story short, I went to see him. I was during the redistricting process. And I went to visit with Ryan in his office. I said, "You're going to change parties now? You're going to flip? Come on, take that coat off. Be who you are. You're a lion. You're not a lamb. What's going on, Ryan Guillen?" And he said, "Pat, I really want to, but I'm a bit concerned about a Republican primary because I'm a Democrat for so long." I said, "I'll tell you what. I'm going to go see President Trump. We're going to visit in Mar-a-Lago in like 6 weeks. I'm going to bring him up to you. I'm going to bring you up to him, rather, and see what he says." He says, and so I talked to the president, and he was great and gracious and lovely in 100 different ways. And I told him about Ryan, and he gets excited, and he says, "Pat," and I say this is my impression I love, "Pat, it's awesome. Give me a hat." And he signs. He goes, "Give it to Ryan." So when he signs his hat, says "Save America." "Ryan, he's saving America, Pat." And I go, "I know, Mr. President. They love you in South Texas." So 6 weeks later, from that point, President Trump endorsed Ryan Guillen. Ryan Guillen switched parties, and he's running for re-election in a 85-90% Hispanic district in the state house. But we already have Tony Gonzalez in Congress, Congressional District 23 is doing a fabulous job. We're going to win Congressional District 15, which is a border district. President Trump won Zapata County, which is right on the Mexican border. He almost won Starr County. He lost those counties in 2016 by like over 30 percentage points. And he won one of them and dang near won the other. Then we've got Mayra Flores, who I endorsed, who's a Republican running in Congressional District 34, who's a firebrand, just smart. Her entire family were Democrats. Now they're all Republicans. Her husband is a Border Patrol agent. That's a +4D district, so the Democrat, in theory, should win it by 4 percentage points. I think Mayra's going to take that seat, and that's going to be, it's going to reverberate. Because you know why they're switching now, Brian? Because they're tired of it. They're tired of the one-party control. They're tired of the monopoly. They're tired of the crime. They're tired of the drug cartels exporting their crime and their poverty into their country. They are Americans, and they have had it, and they want that border secure as well.
Well, maybe
I get fired up over this.
Maybe we need to send you all throughout the country. I mean, you're flipping seats here and there. I mean, let's expand outside of Texas potentially.
Those folks love America, and they're coming on board. And that is the liberals in Texas have. That wasn't what was supposed to happen. It was demographics. It was all not who you are, but what you are. No, Hispanics vote with us. Then we get empowered, and then we burn a bunch of money, and then we enrich ourselves while we serve. No, they've had it, and it's really a seismic shift. It's great.
It's fantastic.
We got to keep Texas.
I love the passion you have for this, and the passion you have for so many different issues. But let's hope you keep this going and flip some more seats.
I know, that'd be great. Yeah.
So next question.
Yes,
let's pivot back to the economy. Over the holidays, millions of Americans were feeling the pain and harsh reality that everything is more expensive, from eggs to gas to Christmas trees. The U.S. inflation, as we just briefly touched on, probably hit the fastest it has in
40 years now,
in 4 decades. Yeah. And helping explain a shift in the Federal Reserve's approach to monetary policy, as well as more consumer anxiety about our economy. So tell us a little bit more about what a member of Congress can do to push back against this rise of inflation. And
because people are concerned about it.
Yeah, rightly so.
Inflation really, at the end of the day, is a tax on all of us for everything we buy. And we're all poor because of it. We have our bank accounts. Remember back in the good old days, 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, you would put money in a checking account and get 4% interest. You don't get any interest.
I'm a little younger than you. I can't remember having that kind of interest rates.
It's like 0.1. It's nothing now.
Wow.
It's less than 1%. But inflation went up 7% this year. So if you had $10,000 in your savings account, that's not really $10,000 of purchasing power anymore. You've lost money. You've lost a lot of money. Yeah. And that's unsustainable. This is like the bad old days of Jimmy Carter double-digit inflation. My staff, every time I would do a TV interview, I would ask for a briefing sheet of the main things and how much they've gone up year over year. They changed constantly. The numbers were constantly changing, and they're getting worse and worse and worse because you're trying to sear these numbers into your mind when you're doing these interviews, and you can't because they were so fluid. But roughly speaking, gasoline went up almost 60% year over year. Home fuel, about 30%. Used cars, 24%. Rentals, about 26%. Foodstuffs, 8-9%. Bacon, of all things, you can't get any more American than bacon, 20%. And so when you look at all these key indicators, I don't know where they get this 7% figure. It seems it probably is a lot higher. And the way in which we can do something about it in Congress is immediately stop this wild spending spree. It shouldn't come to a shock to anyone that if you inject trillions of dollars into the money supply, things are going to cost more. There's a finite number of goods and a finite amount of services that are out there. And if you throw all this money in it, they're all going to cost more. You're not making any more cars, and semiconductors didn't help, the shortage there. But then we also have a supply chain crisis. I mean, a crisis, right?
Seems we have a lot of crises in this country right now.
Over the last year. But then throw in vaccine mandates on a workforce. We have a shortage of labor. We have this supply chain crunch, and you're going to say you're going to make 4 or 5 or 6 or 10% of American workers walk off the jobs, be fired? That's madness. It's only going to make everything worse. It's going to exacerbate problems that we already have. So it was really Bush League, amateur economic policy and monetary policy that got us here, and we've got to rein it in. And I think you're going to see a seismic shift, if you want to talk about that again, in November of this year. It's only 10 months away now, thank the Lord. And all that's going to do is take this drowning person, at least we'll be able to tread water. And then when we flip the White House in 24, then we can swim toward shore and save the country.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, I know, amen.
So Congressman, thank you for touching on those domestic issues. I have no doubt that your constituents back home are very proud of your efforts on these issues and many other. I hear the passion, I see the passion. I'm sure your constituents see it all as well. So we've talked about some domestic issues. Let's switch over to some foreign policy questions. The Islamic Republic of Iran constantly is chanting death to America, death to Israel ever since they came to power in 1979. Recently, the Islamic Republic's new president, Abraham Raisi, who, by the way, has the nickname of the Butcher, that he was given by his people for the role that he has played over the years in the massacre of thousands of Iranian people. Anyways, he's the president now, and he is on the U.S. sanctions list. The Butcher is the president of Iran. He is sanctioned by the United States of America. And he recently declared last week on the second-year anniversary of Qasem Soleimani's killing that President Trump boldly and decisively ordered, that if President Trump and Secretary Pompeo are not held accountable for that, then he wants the United Nations to bring charges against them both. Now, what makes this question even more interesting is the fact that we learned this morning Iran doesn't even have a voice at the United Nations anymore. Their voting rights have been taken away because they have to pay $18 million in dues. Maybe they should stop funding terrorism. They can pay some dues. But so Raisi clearly threatened the United States of America, our former president, our former Secretary of State, surprise, surprise, Congressman, President Biden, Secretary Blinken, haven't said anything publicly in response to Raisi's comments. I guess they, couldn't be bothered to publicly, address this issue. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
The fact that this administration is so idle in so many different facets of governance is really startling. I've never seen anything like it before. And let's also go beyond honesty and let's go to the land of candor and frankness.
Sure.
The reason why the Islamic Republic, and that horrible regime, is they need a great Satan. They need a dodge and they need a deflection. That's why Israel is a convenient excuse. They don't want their people thinking about the misery, and the tough life that they have. They don't want them focused on that because they're going to blame somebody. And they're going to blame the regime because that's where the fault really lies. So the regime then deflects that and says, no, things would be so much better if it weren't for those dang Jews. It'd be so much better if it weren't for the United States of America. This is why, they're the reasons why you're not getting the foodstuffs that you need, that you don't have the job opportunities, that we have high unemployment, that we have endemic drug use. The most abuse of opium in the entire world is in Iran. They don't want to share that. They say, the Iranian regime says their unemployment's at about 9%. So dictatorial regimes tend to lie. You could probably double that. It's probably 19, 20%. You don't want your people focused on that. They don't have any legitimacy at all because they're ruling by the barrel of a gun, and they have since the late 70s, since Khomeini came back from France. So and they're the greatest state sponsor of terrorism, and the hits just keep on coming. The best thing that President Trump could have done is take out Soleimani, because now there's consequences. Now there's consequences for your actions. You want to murder American soldiers and military personnel? You could die next. That puts them on notice. They got to think real hard about the next time. And if they continue to do it, you would hope, if like-minded folks were in the White House, you take them out. That's the way the best English those mullahs understand?
Strength.
Yeah, strength. A gun to the head. Yeah. They understand that. And they're going to react to strength, and they're also going to react to weakness. Right now, we're showing incredible weakness. They are bound and determined to get a nuclear weapon. That's what they want. They'll negotiate because they love our money to help get it faster. And if any kind of deal, the deal that Obama struck with them, they were still going to get that nuke. They're cheating. You can't trust this regime. You just can't. So we have to, if we're even going to think about talking to them again, we have to reinstitute the arms embargo immediately.
It's interesting. President Trump and certainly a lot of Republicans, I'm sure yourself as well, supported the decision that President Trump took to take Soleimani out. Sadly, funny. I don't know how I should describe it, but there were a lot of members on the other side of the aisle, like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, that were quite upset that this action was taken.
Are we surprised?
They said World War III is going to happen and all these different things are going to happen. And now we're 2 years later. World War III didn't happen. The world is certainly a safer place with Soleimani gone. But, they were saying that the world's going to come to an end.
Brian, are you saying that radical liberal Democrats use hyperbole? My goodness, do they? This guy's always going to fall with them. It's almost as if you look at their voting records, the Islamic Republic has a couple of votes in Congress. Who are they allied with? Are they really, are they looking out for the best interest of this country? It's supposed to be their country. Or are they looking out for the best interest of our enemies? I can't answer that question, but it looks shockingly like they're not putting America first.
They're certainly not, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is a good example of, she's never been critical about the Islamic Republic. She's only really critical about Israel, about America, and really, should make the American people question, where are her priorities? We know where your priorities are. We know where a lot of other people's priorities are. But let's switch to the next question here, and we'll keep the focus on this current administration and on the topic of diplomacy with the Iranian regime. As you might know, world leaders were in Vienna for 6 weeks this past summer, having discussions related to coming back to the JCPOA. They returned this past winter for a 7th, 8th, and 9th round of discussions. Still no deal, still no end in sight, and they're farther apart now than they were before. U.S. Special Envoy to Iran, Robert Malley, who I should note was part of Obama's administration as well, has explicitly said that the United States is prepared to lift all economic sanctions on the Iranian regime if they come back to the negotiating table. Now, the Iranian regime, and with President Raisi, the butcher, taking power, they have said that they won't entertain any conversations with the Biden administration unless the U.S. removes all economic sanctions, re-enters the JCPOA with no conditions placed whatsoever in the Iranian regime. So, our group, the Iranian Americans for Liberty, have taken a pretty strong stance on this. Now, there's another group in America called the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, and they're very supportive of our friend that we just mentioned, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. They believe that we should get back into the JCPOA and that we should, without any kind of, negotiations, just go back into the deal no matter what. Again, we've taken the opposite position on this issue. So the question is simple to you. Should the U.S. rejoin the JCPOA, lift these sanctions, or should President Biden pivot back to President Trump's successful maximum pressure campaign?
Absolutely easy maximum pressure, because maximum pressure worked. Their federal or their foreign currency reserves collapsed. I mean, collapsed. I think it was somewhere to the tune of 180 billion, and now it's down to 4. I'm maybe paraphrasing numbers there. Collapsed. To think that, again, going back to the Soviet Union, nobody saw that coming, and they fell quickly. Like that, Eastern Europe was freed within months, and no one saw it coming. The CIA, the MI5 in Britain, in 5 and 6, whatever. James Bond didn't know. And this could happen with the Iranian regime. Again, when you don't have any legitimacy, and only about 25% of your people support the regime. Now, they happen to be the ones with guns, and that's why the regime hasn't fallen yet. You're in a dicey and a precarious position. That's why these totalitarian regimes always have to suppress any dissent. That's why you see China constantly. I mean, you can't be an old senior citizen in China and criticize a regime unless they're going to rob you of your liberty. Same thing in Iran. Remember that video, the kids dancing to that song "Happy"? There were some teenage and early 20-somethings just dancing. Can't have it. They got arrested for that. They got jailed for that because they were being expressive. See, because that was freedom, right? Can't have that. And I think they want that nuclear weapon because then they feel, okay, they're never going to have to deal with a foreign invasion, and it's just another tool to maintain power. So maximum pressure works because I think they could collapse. It's a house of cards.
They were very close, and you're very correct that they were at $4 billion. As of January of this year, the Iranian regime was at $4 billion in international reserves. Now, I'm sorry to tell you, sorry to tell everyone, that as of the end of this year, they have risen from $4 billion to around $35 billion. So that's a lot of billions to keep funding terrorism and sowing division all throughout the world. And of course, that happened on President Biden's watch, and unfortunately, I think more and more like that is going to happen. And listen, it's widely known that the Islamic Republic of Iran funds terrorism all around the world. In recent years, the regime provided financial, operational support to Hamas and Palestinian Jihad inside of Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And over the last couple of months, the Iranian people have been protesting in Iran for one of these very reasons. And we have helped to amplify their voices the best that we can. I mean, the people of Iran are sick and tired of their government, funding terrorist proxies all around the world while they don't have access to basic things like running water, electricity, and a lot of other things. And we saw this firsthand during the latest round of protests. And we talked a little bit before we came in here about this, but I'm curious, what's your position on this? I mean, the Iranian people continue to rise up against this totalitarian regime. Should President Biden maybe stop emboldening the mullahs in Tehran and start supporting the people?
100%. I mean, when you can't feed your family, when your belly is growling every night and you can't feed your children, it gets to a point where you say, enough, and you march, knowing you could eat a bullet, knowing your life could end, because you figure, are we really living anymore, or are we just existing? And that's what's happening in Iran, and it's getting to a tipping point. But to then go back and right when we're to the edge where the regime might suffer a true revolution, where the people take over, where what we need to see in Iran is free and open and fair elections, an independent judiciary, rule of law, a capitalistic economy. There's none of that right now.
None.
We can't trust this regime because all they care about is power. That's what it comes down to. Power and control, just like other dictatorial and totalitarian regimes. So maximum pressure is the only way to do it, and to support the people to rise up. Give them the tools that they need. We've got a CIA, don't we? We've got covert operations. We can get things in that need to be in with, technology that helps as well. Because then, think about a free Iran. I mean, it changes the whole region. Then who funds Hezbollah? Then who funds the Syrian regime? Then who destabilizes Lebanon?
That's a very good point.
And then the region becomes safer. Everybody can take a breath. The Saudis as well. Then Iraq. Then they don't have to deal with the Iranians funding some of those militias in Iraq, and Iraq becomes more stable. I mean, it's not just Iran. It has repercussions across the region.
It would have a very large ripple effect, like you said, across the region, and especially in Iraq. A lot of people don't know that just a month ago, a Iranian-backed militia inside of Iraq tried to assassinate the Iraqi prime minister with drones. They got very close. They almost killed him. You've never heard about that in the media anywhere.
They don't want you to know.
Of course they don't. But this is the impact that the Iranian regime has. The IRGC general was just in Iraq a couple days ago. So it's very clear, where they have their powers of influence. And you're right. I mean, not just the region, the world would be a better place if this terrorist regime wasn't there anymore.
Well, Brian, the Iranian regime wants to destabilize countries that surround it, just like the South African apartheid regime did. They wanted to destabilize their neighbors because that made them feel safer. They want weak neighbors. Iran wants weak neighbors. We want strong democratic partners. And we're just at odds, and then with Russia up there helping them, that's another story and a topic for another day.
I think we need to be even more concerned about China.
Yeah.
China did a deal with them over the summer, a 25-year economic deal that will see Beijing investing $400 billion into Iran over the next 25 years. Now, Iran hasn't even seen $10 million in outside investment in the last 20 years. $400 billion. What are they going to do with $400 billion?
Thank you. Well, they're going to survive is what they're going to do. And that's what something like President Trump, he's in office right now. I bet you he goes to China and says, "Oh, you want to cut that deal? Oh, and we're gonna take away so much more of your leverage in trade with the United States. We're their biggest customer, and we need to. I mean, I was in business. You're almost forced now, if you're in certain industries, to do business with China. You can't, survive. You can't compete, and that's a shame. You should really have other options, and we all need to work. I think COVID really opened our eyes to the dangers of the Chinese regime. I was asked in another interview last week, is China a greater threat to the United States than the Soviet Union had been? And I said, it's not even close, yes. And the answer to that is because they're 11 times the population of, let's say, Russia. They're 11 times the GDP of Russia. The Soviets never had a GDP that could compete with us. They had some military might, but it was really, again, a house of cards. The Chinese have a GDP that's almost on par with us. And they have 5 times the population. They are a huge and massive threat. And that's why we need to draw the line at Taiwan. Because if we don't, and this $400 billion deal with Iran, that's not going to stop. And then Iran becomes a client state, a de facto client state of China. That's even worse moving forward.
Well, when President Biden, before going to our next question, let me just add that when President Biden took power earlier in 2021, there was most certainly a major vacuum of power in the Middle East, and China filled that vacuum, as has Russia, for sure. And I think all American people really need to be concerned about what's happening there, because it will make its way here. Iran has a great relationship with Venezuela. Venezuela's pretty close to us, so we definitely need to be concerned about that. So I mentioned earlier about Qasem Soleimani's second anniversary of the killing from President Trump was last week. We believe the world is a safer place with Soleimani gone. There's some in Congress who I mentioned to you, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and others, who don't believe that way. So the question to you is the world a safer place with Qasem Soleimani gone?
I would say good riddance, scumbag. I mean, I'm glad that he was an SOB, and he murdered American troops. He murdered our nation's finest that go into harm's way to protect you, me, and our families. So that was a gleeful day. It's always sad in theory when a human being loses their life. But some human beings are better off in the earth than standing on it. And he was one of them. And I can't applaud President Trump enough doing that. I talked directly to Secretary Pompeo and Director Ratcliffe, extensively with him for about 3 hours. He's my predecessor in Congress, and President Trump about Afghanistan. And I thought it was interesting. Secretary Pompeo said that gave us leverage when they were dealing with the Taliban and knew that President Trump would take them out. I mean, he made it really clear to the Taliban leader that he went gangster. I mean, he went Tony Soprano on him. I love that. That was a baller move on President Trump's part to send a picture of the Taliban leader's house to him while they were talking via remote and saying, oh, if any of our soldiers die, just know you're next. You die next. That's strong. That's some strength. I'm sure State Department was, oh, you can't do that. No, yeah, you can, and he did. Yeah. But he had credibility because Soleimani had just been taken out. So they knew he meant business. It wasn't some idle threat. He would do it. Did any of our soldiers get killed under President Trump's watch after that deal? No, they didn't, because they knew he was serious. He's coming after you. Nobody was scared of Jimmy Carter. They weren't. They're not scared. They're not scared of Biden. They weren't all that scared of Obama. Yeah. The Crimea was taken in 2014 under Obama. Did Russia have any land grabs? And you know what the press lie, the big Russian hoax that Russia had something on Trump and he was going to be all weak toward him? Did they take any turf at all? Did they take a blade of grass in the 4 years President Trump was in office? No. As president would say, no. And you know why? Because he was a tough hombre. Yeah. And he wasn't going to put up with it. And they knew it. And you know, President Nixon, I don't know if you knew this, tried to manufacture he called it the madman theory. Nixon. He really wanted Brezhnev and the Soviets to believe he was nuts. Like he was unstable. Unpredictable. Yeah, unpredictable. Mm-hmm. And he literally would joke with his staff and say, the madman theory, right? Because he wanted them to go, oh, we can't mess with, Dick Nixon. We don't know what he'll do. Right. That's not a bad thing. In baseball, I got my great comms guy, was a great pitcher in college, Austin. He doesn't want the hitter to know what he's going to throw next. Is it going to be a deuce? Is it going to be a fastball? Is it going to be 90 on the black? They don't know. We want to keep them guessing. It's the same thing in international affairs. And we want them, in one sense, we want them to know we're going to hit back, with deterrence. Mm-hmm. If Iran gets aggressive, that's why we got to make it clear. You cross those borders, we're coming at you. You want to meddle in Iraq? We're going to meddle back. We have to. Otherwise, they're just going to be more emboldened. We've seen that time and again throughout history. And they're reacting to Biden's weakness right now. And we've got to do everything we can to encourage strength.
They are very good at exploiting weakness. And not just the Iranians, the Chinese, Russia, Venezuela.
Thugs, bullies. You give the bully your lunch money, he's coming back the next day for the lunch money. Then he's going to take your sneakers. Yep. Then he's going to take your girlfriend. Then he's going to take your backpack. Yep. You probably go live in your house and eat your pancakes with your mom, right? At some point, you got to draw the damn line in the sand and say no more. Yeah. No more retreat. No more falling back. Absolutely not. Punch the damn guy in the face. And then you know what? He's not going to take your lunch money anymore because it's too costly. I mean, I hate to see, but that's the world. The world's a dangerous place. This world has walls. And they have bad players and bad actors and evil. And we have to fight evil. You know, well, think about the people that we could have saved if Hitler had never taken power.
Sure.
Tens of millions died because of that. Mao, same thing. And we had our little red diaper doper baby morons in college in the 70s, you know, with the little red books they were selling and all that stuff. The left were selling and celebrating Mao, who may have been responsible for more deaths, human deaths, than anyone in history. There's estimates it could be 100 million. We'll never know for sure, probably. I mean, that's topping Stalin. When you can top Stalin and Hitler combined, you're one evil SOB. And our American left was, you know, celebrating him. That shows you where their priorities are. And they haven't changed much. They just have new heroes and they're misplaced. Sorry about the riff, but, you know, I just had to get it out. I feel better.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. You got to speak truths, Brian.
It's truth to power, as people like to say. Yeah. So our last question here. Now I want to tell you before I ask this last question. You can let your hair down a little bit here because you haven't let your hair down yet.
I haven't had hair in my eyes since I was a teenager.
So you can just
what's that sensation like?
Loosen up a little bit for the next question. Okay, so we talked
because we were so tight.
Yeah,
for the last hour.
Exactly. So listen, we've talked domestic policy, we've talked foreign policy. Now tell the audience a little bit more about you as a personal level. So here's a question I have for you. Okay, I know this might be controversial to ask you, but I'm going to ask: barbecue, Texas or North Carolina?
Texas.
Yeah. Why is Texas? Why is Texas better than North Carolina?
North Carolina is like our child. It's like our baby. It's like this. It's like it's teaching. It's the acorn and we are the oak.
Okay. All right.
Maybe they get there someday, but it's going to be a long time. I just think we'll grow like a red, they'll be like maybe an oak and then we'll be, a redwood.
So if there was a second best to Texas barbecue, who would it be?
It'd be like Texas barbecue. Texas and then Texas and maybe
then some more Texas.
Third place Texas. You know, when I was, I graduated college and I went to Notre Dame in Indiana, but I was from the People's Republic of Massachusetts. And I sought political asylum in the Republic of Texas. And so I was in the Air Force, and they gave it was a dream sheet. They called it the dream sheet because you could say Hawaii, but you were just dreaming, you weren't going to get there. You ended up in North Dakota or something. Although North Dakota is a great place. But anyway, you get 5 choices. I put Texas 5 times, and I got Texas.
So I guess the next question I have, you seem to like Texas quite a bit. So, are the Dallas Cowboys still America's team?
Yeah, they are. Well, see, again, I would like to delude myself into thinking that the University of Notre Dame football team is America's team.
Okay.
We used to think that. But we used to win a lot of ball games and bowl games and things when I was there. And then I left, and it didn't really happen so much anymore. So not that I had any direct influence on it, but I was a great guy on the sidelines to go, yes. Good job, guys. I think I was the lucky charm.
Yeah? Okay.
But I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to make a deep run this playoff season. Yeah, we're going to see it.
So last year, Byron Donalds, Congressman Donalds, is sitting where you're sitting, and somehow we start talking about how I'm from Philadelphia, and he just went off on me about the Eagles because 2 days before we're sitting here, he's a Cowboys fan. By the way.
Oh, is he really?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if that's okay to publicly say that.
I knew he was a good dude. Yeah.
So he went off on me about how his Cowboys just beat my Eagles up. So just so you know, you have. Did
you kick it back to him and say, "But when's the last time you won a Super Bowl?" Because you would have won that argument.
I was a little tongue tied, to be honest with you. I wasn't expecting him to drop that he's a Cowboys fan on me, and he was bringing the fire, man.
From Florida too.
Yeah, I think he's originally from New York.
Really? And he's a Cowboys.
I would have thought he's a Giants fan.
That's Exhibit A of America's team, right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay. Well, Congressman, we've reached our time limit for today's conversation. I want to tell you, on behalf of the Iranian Americans for Liberty, I really want to thank you for taking the time to connect with the community, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to provide some brief closing remarks before we wrap up. So to tell us, what is your message to the Iranian American community and maybe even the Iranian people back in Iran that might be watching tonight?
I think there's an amazing amount of credibility with Iranian Americans because so many left. It's tough to leave your homeland. Some and many had to leave because their lives were endangered by this very regime 40 years ago, right? I have Iranian American friends who tell me that Some of them have, many have family still there. And when you have folks that have those ties and they can speak to that country and what that country could be, Americans tend to listen. Oh, you're from Iran, tell me about it. Oh, you lived there for the first 20 years of your life or 40 years of your life? What was it like? What can it be like? And I really think about Taiwan and South Korea in this context. They didn't become democracies like that. They are thriving democracies now, but it took decades. And it does take decades. I mean, the Shah was a dictator, we know that. But there was hope there, because you can go from the right and get to democracy. You never go from the left to democracy. You just never do. And I don't think we're going to see that in Iran unless the people rise up. And having Americans of Iranian descent furthering that along and speaking truth to power, as you said, would certainly help. And I would encourage them to continue to do that. Write their members of Congress, come and see us. We work for you. Educate the ones that are misguided and want to coddle this regime and want to enable it. Yeah. We can't have that. We can't be an appeaser, because that doesn't get us where we need to go, because they're bullies and they're thugs, and we need to take them out and take them out of power.
Well, Congressman, thank you for the powerful closing remarks and for all of your time this evening. And thank you to you, to the audience, for tuning in to our discussion with Congressman Fallon. Our next event will be on February 4th at 3 p.m. with the former Acting Director of National Intelligence, Ambassador Richard Grinnell. So please make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel to be notified whenever we go live. But until next time, remember to lead with liberty at every turn, and have a good evening, and may God continue to bless our great nation, the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Yeah.
Hooah.
Very well.